welcome back. I don't know about you, but I've met quite a few audiophiles over the years who somehow have this superhuman hearing capability. Now, I've heard some people talk about, oh, I can hear up to 25,000 kilohertz and all the rest of it, which I just say nonsense. But there is an element of truth in a lot of what is being said. Meaning, if I'm listening to two different DACs, which we've done recently, and we'll put a link to the last one on that topic, in this listening room with this fabulous acoustics and great high quality equipment, I can hear and detect differences. But if I bring somebody in who has never heard those differences before, never really listened in the way that I listen, they may not hear any difference at all. Or it may be just a random thought. So today, in this talk, I want to talk about a very, very important topic, which is how we hear. And I think I'm going to take it in a direction that you may not expect. But let me start by giving you a question to contemplate, and I will answer it and I'll come to it at the end of this talk. The question is this. According to the laws of physics, a wavelength, the length of a wave of any given frequency, is the speed of sound divided by that frequency. So, if we take 343 meters per second as being the speed of sound, meaning if something is 343 meters away and someone crashes on some cymbals and you're right at the back, it will take you a second to hear it. Logical. Well, let's just take 40 hertz. Imagine you can hear 40 hertz, the low beat of something, in your listening room. At 40 hertz, you need 8.6 or 8.5 meters for that wavelength to form. So how do you hear that in your listening room if, for example, like this one, it's only 6 meters long? Maybe your listening room's only 4 meters long. How do you hear that low wave? And then even more amazingly, how could you possibly hear it on headphones where the distance between the diaphragm and the headphone or the ear pod is actually probably only 2 centimeters maximum from the eardrum? How can you possibly hear those low notes if the wavelength hasn't yet even formed? That's the question for later. But now a little bit of context. Why am I sitting in this chair talking about this topic? Why am I passionate about this topic? Because recently I had a young man sitting here in the listening room, and he is coming to 2-channel stereo for the first time. He loves music. He loves technology and kit. So he's had very, very, very expensive headphones, and I've recently bought a very lovely pair of headphones from Austrian Audio, an enormous amount of money. I never thought I'd spend that on a pair of headphones, but they're really great. So he's come to 2-channel with these headphones, and he came from America to here in Belgium to listen to our Sibelius speakers in this room. And I could see the trauma going on because he had this idea about what amp would sound like and this, that and the other. And we tried different amps, and I have some of the amps that he wanted to hear here in the listening room. And this is what got me thinking. He's listening to or trying to listen to 2-channel stereo in the same way that he's listening to headphones. Now, logically, it's obvious that he knows and I know that when you're listening in headphones, everything in the left ear comes into the left ear and everything from the right comes into the right ear. And these two don't mix. It's just in. So everything is being formed in your head. Whereas in 2-channel stereo, obviously, your left ear hears the left speaker, but it also hears the right speaker and vice versa. And because of our amazing brains, and because of evolution, and because of the need to know exactly where a sound comes from in order to so we don't get killed in danger, over the years our brains have evolved the most amazing technology. So if you're sitting in your chair and the sound comes into your left ear from your left speaker, but then it comes into your right ear, let's assume that's like 25 centimeters further, your brain notices that it's later. And I've made a little calculation that it's 73, if I'm correctly, 72 microseconds later. So we're almost in nanosecond technology, times by 1,000, we get to the nanoseconds later. It detects that it's come later, and it notices that it's not quite as loud. And with those two parameters, it can say, it must be then over there, which is phenomenal. Now, that's not for all frequencies, because anything under about 400 hertz is becoming very omnidirectional. So it's very hard with the lower frequencies to begin to place them. But of course, the story isn't that simple. In the listening room, or in any room in a concert hall, the sound is bouncing all over the place and it's coming off the wall, bouncing off the floor, bouncing off the top. And depending what frequency it is, it will bounce and absorb in a different way. And this is the big point, that in a headphone, the sound from the high frequencies is coming straight to his eardrum. Okay, so it's not being absorbed anywhere. Whereas in a listening room, if you're sitting 3 meters back, then a lot of the high frequency energy has gone. It's been absorbed, even just into the air. If there's a humidity is higher, it will always sound different if your humidity is higher or lower in your room. It will get absorbed if there's soft furnishing somewhere, if your speaker's pointing in a certain direction and it's bouncing off something. It will just get absorbed because of the amount of energy. The low frequencies tend to travel further. Hence, when you're walking in the street and you hear some people in a car with a boom, boom, boom or whatever, you hear that noise. You don't hear any of the other frequencies because they're all absorbed. And those lower frequencies will travel through the car bodywork or through a wall, and that's why you hear them. But of course, out of doors, as I say, we're a long way away and the wavelength has had a chance to form. But I'll come back to that later. Okay, so the interesting thing is, for me, what is the difference then? Because obviously, if your brain is detecting time difference, if it's detecting amplitude difference, and it's able to project location, it means that with 2-channel stereo in a good room, the sound that we hear, the band that we hear, are in front of us. And so my young visitor has got to get used to the fact that when he takes his headphones off, instead of being in his head, it's in front of him. The singer is in front. And depending on the positioning of the speakers, depending on the system, the singer will either be right in front of his nose like this, or will be further back. In fact, we had this problem in this listening room in the beginning due to the acoustic balancing. The singers were too up front, and it was kind of horrid. I thought, no, I really don't want Willie Nelson half a meter away from my face. And so we adjusted the acoustics of the reflective panels so that he's nicely further back, a more comfortable distance. So you get this wonderful, lifelike separation of instruments and people, which you don't get in the same way in headphones. So that's a big difference for him. But the major difference is, which I've already hinted at, is the amount of high frequency information you're getting. It gets lost. It's so directional, high frequencies, where the other frequencies, as I say, bounce all over the place, which means that you get your brain's getting all sorts of complex patterns, and it's processing those in extraordinary real time, which would make any modern DSP chip, they would have to say, look at what we can do. and building this image. And so he doesn't get the same level of detail as he gets with his headphones. He can't. And that's why I have headphones sometimes when I'm doing a mixing and mastering, just before we go to press the button to say, okay, that's it. I'm always listening on a very good quality pair of open back headphones. And I used to listen on my Sennheiser HD 600s, and I used them for years and years and years because they were kind of moderate. They didn't exaggerate the bass or anything. But, you know, then I was lent a pair of these Austrian audio headphones, as I talk about, as I mentioned before, and the bass was so detailed and it was so clean, and all the rest was nice and it was just natural. But they also sounded very, very similar to my Neumann studio monitors. So when I switched from one to the other, there was no major difference, which I did get from the Sennheisers to the Neumanns. So anyway, I just thought you'd like to know that's why I did it. And as I get older, I want to work later at night. I don't want to disturb people. Using headphones becomes a very, very sensible and polite thing to do. But I digress. So the difference then, nice three-dimensional, natural sounding soundstage with 2-channel, loads of detail in your head. So that's the first thing he has to get over to make that difference. But it doesn't answer our question about audiophiles and what they can hear. Okay, so let's look at how the ear works, because there's so much to explain there before I explain about how the audiophile works. Okay, so I've got here a little picture of the cochlea, and here's obviously our ear with the sound waves entering in, and here is a Trommelfläche, what do we call that, the eardrum, and then behind the eardrum you have this pipe, if you like, where the sound travels down. I should say between the two we have the famous malleus, incus and stapes, the three bones, which basically when this eardrum vibrates, these move and they create pressure in the ear here. And along this canal here, the scala tympani, there are lots of little microscopic hairs. And each of these hairs are like tuning forks, and they are tuned to specific frequencies. So as it goes through with the higher frequencies and then through, those, when they start vibrating, when they hit the resonant frequency, they send a signal, electronic signal to the brain, and the brain does all the calculations. So that's basically how it's working. And this is very important, especially if you have ever suffered from tinnitus, you know, that loud piercing noise or notes that you can get in your ears. And it's an interesting thing because I have tinnitus to a certain extent, but I've learned to overcome it quite well. And when it came to me quite suddenly, only in my left ear, I was very, very disturbed by it. And so I went off to Antwerp, and I met lots of specialists, but there's a specialist, Professor van Rompuy, in Antwerp in Belgium, who really is a world-leading specialist in hearing and cochlear implants and then tinnitus. And he was explaining to me how that works. Now, it's only a theory because no one really knows, except that the whistling that you hear or the noise that you hear in here doesn't exist. It's completely made up in your brain. And one theory, just one theory, is that the frequency, and in my case it's always the same, it's about 8,700 hertz. That frequency is like that little hair, that tuning fork, if you like, got damaged. And the brain is sending these frequencies, is monitoring all these little hairs and saying, oh, something's not right here. And it generates the sound in its head, virtually. This is only a theory, okay? And by generating it in your head, it gets a reaction from Harley. And I'm going, what? Oh, what is that horrible noise? And our brains are programmed to detect noises which have an impact on us. Let me give you a brilliant example of this, because I'm getting there, stay with me, why audiophiles can hear things which other people can't. And Professor Van Rompuy explained to me this. He said, Harley, imagine you're at a dinner party in a largish room, and there's a group of you standing around a table or just standing in a small group, and you've got your glasses of wine and someone's talking about their new car or whatever it is, and you're listening. Now, behind you are other groups, or another group, and they're talking, but you don't hear anything of what they're saying. Your brain is perceiving a certain kind of background noise, but you're focusing on this guy's new car and whether the electric was the right decision or whatever. And you're engrossed in that conversation until someone in the other group mentions your name. Your brain immediately hears this because it's been monitoring this other conversation going on all the time, but you were unaware of it because you're focusing on the electric car versus the petrol car or whatever. And it hears this thing and it says, oh, Harley, pay attention. And so suddenly you hear this, and it's almost as if the person has said your name loud, but they probably haven't. They may have even whispered. And suddenly your brain's saying, what is going on in that other group behind you is maybe more relevant to you and your existence than the conversation that in the group. And suddenly you can start to hear what is going on. It's known that spies who work for governments or whatever are trained specifically to listen to conversations in other groups while smiling and nodding and paying attention to the group that they're in, because it's a really big advantage. You can switch in and out. So that ability for our brain to notice some information when we don't normally hear it, okay? I was also talking to one of our loudspeaker builders, and he's got a machine which cuts the wood, it cuts the angle. And ever so often, if one of the teeth, and there are many, is slightly damaged, and this disc spins at some fantastic speed, they can hear it in the office on the other side. It's just a tiny note, and the operators don't hear it. They hear it and think, oh, that blade needs replacing. I can hear there's a subtle difference. To you and me, we would never hear it. And this is why audiophiles are able to tune in on very, very specific things. I've got this famous recording from Jackson Browne called Linda Paloma off the Pretender album. And I drive everybody nuts. We've got a young director now of Pearl Acoustics, Dries Colliers. And when Dries joined us, I mean, he was very young, 22, something like that. He started working with us. He studied acoustics at university. He's a jazz musician, plays the trumpet and percussion and now the saxophone. Really passionate about music. And he would come in and he couldn't hear the differences in the speakers that I was talking about. And I would tap them with my knuckles. Tuk, 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 and I could hear whether the enclosure was really, really tight and whether it's ready to go or whether it needed more work or whatever. He couldn't hear that in the beginning. And I used to drive him nuts, absolutely nuts, because whenever I was testing a loudspeaker or systems, I was always playing Linda Paloma, especially if I was testing amplifiers or DACs, because I know exactly where Jackson Browne is sitting. I know exactly where the guitars are left and right. I know all the little details. I hear the scissors. There's a little bit of sibilance on his voice in the beginning. I know the grade. So what I can do is I can focus on just the S's and the amount of decay on the S, or a very, very specific point. And when I'm doing that, I'm no longer hearing the music. But if you're Dries and you're walking into the room for the first time, all you hear is the music and you've just heard it 5 times. And I say, but listen to that. Now, poor Dries, over the years, He's learned to listen. He knows instantly when an enclosure is right or not right, thank goodness. So we train ourselves. We do what I do in the dinner party. We are focusing just on the double bass. And we think, listen to the fingering of that double. I can hear his fingers on the frets. And it's either annoying or it's something wonderful. When it's something wonderful, wow, this Pontus DAC from Denafrips, wow, listen to the fingering on the double bass. It's there on all the other DACs as well, but we just don't notice it, or we haven't focused on it at that moment. And that's the problem when we're switching from one piece of equipment to another. Sometimes when we switch, we start to focus on something else, or we don't come back to it. And that can also give us a bias. So audiophiles are really, really good if they're real true hobbyists, hi-fi hobbyists, at listening to very, very, very specific sounds. And if they detect the tiniest difference in that sound, they know it instantly. So they're not lying, they're not kidding. Of course they can't hear more than 20,000 hertz because the human ear can't hear above that. And they can't hear below 20, but they can feel it. And there's the big difference between headphones and loudspeakers. Because when you're listening to low frequencies, even 80 hertz, the kick drum, I think you feel it in your belly, you feel it in your chest, which you don't with headphones. You'll hear it really clear and you hear it really clean, and you'll be able to say, oh, you know what? That's a S-type kind of skin. It's made of this, that polyurethane, and it's stretched by that, and it's probably made by, because you're getting this enormous amount of information directly into your ear. And so in order to get that in 2-channel stereo, you have to pay a hell of a lot of money on loudspeakers. Of course, you can do it with bookshelves, but you're not getting the full effect because we're back to acoustics, and I'm sorry, there's no other way around it. There's no magic solution here. So this feeling of music which you get when you're listening in the room. So let's conclude a little bit now by answering that question. How is it possible that we're hearing these low frequencies in the room or with headphones, and yet the wavelength hasn't had a chance to form? And it's quite simple. There are 2 main ways in which we hear. We hear in Flemish we call it the trommelvlees, and it's the eardrum, the eardrum. When the wavelength comes and it hits the eardrum vibrates in line with that wave. Okay, I'm simplifying because obviously music is a whole gamut of waves. So eardrums, the liquid, the fluids going over those hairs, the ones with the right frequency start moving, send the signals, right? Okay, that's with the wave. But a wave is actually pressure, sound pressure. And that's why we measure in decibels. The pressure level of hitting the drum, but the wave hits the drum. The second way that we hear is just with sound pressure. So when you've got a pair of headphones on and they are playing 40 hertz, although the wavelength isn't going to get formed until it's the other side of your house, actually the pressure is still there. So it's still pushing the eardrum with the same amount of pressure at the same frequency, and therefore we hear it. There is a perceived difference between pure pressure and in the air and waves, and that's mostly due to the fact that when we're in air, the air has an effect, the room has effect, the floor has effect, the resonant frequencies of all the things. If you're in a forest and you hear sounds coming to you, the difference between in the headphones and in the forest is due to the nature of the way that sound, the moisture in the air, all of those things gives us the extra richness which most humans like and prefer. So if you've grown up listening to great quality stereo with earbuds or headphones, converting to this new world is quite a journey. And my advice is don't get fooled by advertising slogans of electronics and equipment. Focus on the room that you're going to be listening in. Try and get the acoustics of that space similar to your acoustics in your headphones if you can. Make sure it's not too vibrant, all the rest of it. But learn to get used to the sound of that space. Because as I always say, a less expensive system in a good room will always sound better than the most expensive system in a poor room. It's just fact. The kitchen radio, when the person reading the news or telling you a story, if the room acoustics are nice, it's going to be fine. If the room acoustics are horrible, you can put the most expensive von Schweikerts or Wilson audios or even Sibelius rooms speakers in the room. It's never going to sound great. And so there is this balance, and it's to do with the fact of the amount of information coming into our ears and all that processing that has to go on. It's the old airport situation. You're in the airport and you're hearing the announcement for your flight, but you're hearing it through 3 or 4 different loudspeakers. It's all coming to you at different times, maybe in a foreign language. You're trying to make head nor tail of it. It's horrible, it's tiring, it's oppressive. And that is my little talk on how we hear and how is it possible technically and emotionally for audiophiles to hear and detect things which maybe other people who are not interested in this hobby will never even notice. If you have been, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy the music.